A single piece of carved driftwood lies half buried beneath a thin layer of frozen moss on the eastern slope of Mount Håkonsfjord, just beyond where the permafrost gives way to firmer tundra. The grain is smooth, worn by centuries of wind and water, but still bears the mark of careful craftsmanship. Deep grooves shaped not by natural forces, but by human hands that knew how to follow the wood's curve without splitting it. This fragment, found during a routine archaeological survey in 2018, sits at the center of a quiet valley where no settlement would have been expected. Its surface is etched with intersecting lines, rings, and arcs that do not match any known Norse symbol or runic inscription. Nearby, soil layers reveal traces of hearths stacked beneath each other across generations, their ash still holding subtle chemical signatures of sustained fire use long before Viking ships ever navigated the North Atlantic. The valley's contours suggest deliberate choice, sheltered from prevailing winds, facing south toward the weak Arctic sun during winter months, with a narrow riverbank just below for fresh water and fish. Yet none of this aligns with what historians believed about human habitation in northern Scandinavia at that time, before the Norse expansion into Svalbard and Greenland. The site has no shipwrecks or weapons typical of seafaring warriors. Instead, layers beneath the surface contain remarkably preserved woven reed mats, tools made from driftwood and bone, and even fragments of a rope coiled with precision not seen in early Scandinavian assemblages. This is not a Viking outpost. The people who lived here, whose names have been lost to time, lived quietly on the edge of survival, adapting over centuries to conditions that should have made sustained settlement impossible. Their tools show no sign of metal use beyond small, localized iron finds. Their presence in this remote place defies expectation, not invaders, but residents, not conquerors, but keepers. And what they left behind, this single piece of wood, this patterned mat, these layered fires, is more than evidence. It is a quiet claim to existence. In the jagged embrace of northern Scandinavia, where the Arctic Circle cuts through dense spruce forests and winds howl across glacial valleys, a forgotten chapter of human history has begun to emerge from beneath centuries of ice and silence. Around 1000 BCE, long before the Norse voyages that would come to define the North Sea's legacy, this remote high-latitude region hosted a people whose lifeways were shaped by an intimate understanding of sea and land, one forged not in conquest but in endurance and adaptation. Their settlements stretch along fjords carved deep into the continental shelf, where ancient stone foundations now lie beneath layers of peat and sediment, hidden from view until modern archaeologists, armed with sonar and soil analysis, began to uncover their remnants. This was no fleeting encampment. The people who lived here developed a maritime culture rooted in seasonal migration along coastlines, navigating fjords with vessels that were likely constructed from driftwood and stitched hide, though the exact design remains uncertain. They relied on seals and fish as staples, exploiting marine resources not just for sustenance, but as central to their social organization and ritual life. Evidence suggests they engaged in complex exchange networks stretching across the Arctic fringe. While much of Europe was emerging into the Bronze Age, with expanding agriculture and early urban centers forming in southern regions, this northern frontier remained largely isolated. Yet isolation did not mean stagnation. Instead, a quiet innovation flourished. A culture that mastered extreme environments through subtle technological adaptations, stone-lined dwellings for insulation, tools crafted from bone and flint to precise specifications, and perhaps even seasonal tracking of animal migrations using celestial cues. When the Norse began their maritime expansion centuries later, they would encounter remnants of this society, its language long lost, its artistry faded, The traces remain in place, names that predate Old Norse, in burial mounds with unique orientations, and in the enduring rhythm of life along a coastline that had already known how to thrive where few others dared to stay. What we know of this ancient Arctic society comes from layers of evidence buried beneath centuries of glacial ice and shifting tundra. At its core are the remnants of stone foundations, carefully laid, aligned with seasonal sun paths, suggesting a deep understanding of orientation and climate patterns. Osies. These foundations, often found in clusters near coastal inlets or river mouths, reveal not just habitation, but deliberate planning, circular dwellings with central hearths, ringed by storage pits that once held dried fish, animal hides, and birch bark containers. Excavations have uncovered tools made from bone, antler, and finely worked stone, spearheads shaped for deep-sea fishing, knives with hafting grooves indicating complex composite construction. Organic materials are rare in the Arctic soil, but some preserved remains offer startling clarity: twisted rope strands of plant fiber, remnants of woven baskets, even traces of textiles dyed with natural pigments. These artifacts suggest a society skilled not only in survival but in craftsmanship and trade. Radiocarbon dating of organic material. Bone fragments, charcoal from hearths, seeds found in storage pits has revealed consistent occupation spanning over 700 years before the first Norse arrivals. Precision of these dates is bolstered by dendrochronology on driftwood used in construction. Tree ring patterns match known sequences across northern Scandinavia, confirming timelines with remarkable accuracy. But perhaps most telling are the isotopic signatures locked within human and animal bones. Stable isotope analysis shows a diet rich in marine protein fish, seals, even whales, which aligns with coastal settlement patterns but contradicts earlier assumptions about pre-Viking Arctic life being strictly terrestrial or nomadic. While no written records survive, the harsh environment erases paper and parchment. Certain rock carvings known as petroglyphs depict figures in layered garments, vessels resembling boats, and celestial alignments. Their symbolism remains partially mysterious, but their recurrence across multiple sites suggests shared cultural memory. The reliability of these clues varies. The stone structures are physical certainty, radiocarbon dates carry scientific weight, isotopic data is highly credible when cross-referenced with context. Yet interpretations of petroglyphs remain open to debate. Together they form a coherent picture, not just of survival but of culture shaped by ice, sea, and sky. They lived in longhouses low against the wind, built from driftwood and stone, their roofs sloping deep to shed snow like a bear's back. In spring, when the ice cracked open with a sound like thunder beneath the fjord, children would run barefoot across thawing mud, laughing as they chased seals along the shore. The women carried birch bark baskets into tidal pools where kelp and mussels clung to stone, their fingers raw from cold but practiced in every fold of the tide's rhythm. They cooked fish on flat stones over small fires, drying fillets on racks hung between posts. Meat was rare, seals were shared, not wasted, and every scrap went into stew or broth. Men shaped bone and antler into needles, hooks, and nets with steady hands. Their tools bore marks of careful repair, each nick a story of use. They carved sled runners from pine that stood tall in sheltered valleys, and they repaired them in winter's long dark when the sky stayed gray for weeks. The children learned to read the wind not by sight but by touch, the way it pulled at their clothes, how it carried voices across the ice. They walked paths worn deep into snowfields, following old trails known only by elders' whispers. They did not fear solitude, they were accustomed to silence that pressed against the eardrums like pressure in water. When storms came, the houses held tight, the stone walls thick and layered with turf, and families huddled near firelight, listening to stories told in low voices so as not to wake the sleeping dogs. They knew their land intimately, not just its gifts but its dangers. Sudden shifts beneath ice, wolves that moved like shadows between rock spires. They left offerings at cairns they did not name, not out of fear but out of respect for what had come before them. This was not a life lived in defiance of the cold, it was one shaped by it, guided by memory and modest choices, where every decision carried weight and consequence. They were not merely surviving, they were living with a quiet precision that spoke less of hardship than of deep understanding of place, of time, of belonging to something older than memory. Beneath layers of ice and time, a quiet revolution in human adaptation unfolds, not through conquest or empire, but through patience, precision, and an intimate understanding of a world few dared to inhabit. The central dynamic lies not in war or migration, but in resilience, the ability of a people to thrive in one of Earth's most relentless environments without leaving behind the tools of their survival. This is not a story of sudden arrival or fleeting presence. It is one of sustained occupation across centuries, built on maritime knowledge so refined it defied the very notion that such complexity could exist beyond southern Europe or Mediterranean coastlines. What makes this civilization compelling is its quiet mastery over ice-laden seas and glacial tundras. Remains reveal longhouses aligned not by chance but with celestial markers, solar paths, star constellations indicating a deep cosmological engagement with the natural world. Fish hooks carved from bone, intricate weaving combs of antler, stone tools shaped to precise tolerances, all speak not only of craft but of accumulated wisdom passed across generations. These were not nomadic hunters in fleeting camps, but people who returned each year to the same rocky shores, building homes that weathered storms and thaw cycles with deliberate design. Their maritime technology was no accident. Driftwood vessels, reconstructed from fragments found near fjords, show signs of lashed planks and controlled buoyancy techniques, long thought to emerge only centuries later in Norse seafaring traditions. But here lies the tension. If these people were already navigating open coasts with such sophistication, what did they trade? What knowledge passed between them and others across the sea? The absence of written records leaves their language unknown, but their material choices suggest a culture that valued durability over ornamentation, sustainability over expansion. The core question is not whether they existed, but how they persisted where few believed life could endure. And in doing so, they challenge our entire understanding of human adaptation, not as an act of struggle against nature, but as one of harmony with it. The turning came not with a single thunderclap, but in slow shifts. Changes too subtle to mark on any calendar, yet profound enough to alter the course of an entire way of life. For centuries, the people of the northern fjords had shaped their world through intimate knowledge of currents, ice patterns, and seasonal rhythms. Their settlements thrived along sheltered coasts, built with precision from driftwood and stone, their longhouses arranged in quiet alignment with prevailing winds. But then a shift began, something in the air, or perhaps in the sea itself. The warming that had once allowed for greater access to coastal waters now brought unexpected volatility. Ice patterns grew unpredictable, storms arrived earlier, more violent than before. The delicate balance of subsistence hunting and fishing faltered under these changing rhythms. Evidence from sediment cores shows a sudden influx of marine debris, perhaps displaced by stronger currents or shifting sea ice, suggesting that the ocean itself was transforming in ways not yet fully understood. With diminished resources came strain. Burial sites from this period show signs of nutritional stress, particularly among younger individuals. The careful distribution of food and goods observed earlier appears to fracture under pressure. Some settlements were abandoned with remarkable speed, others persisted but adapted, changing house designs, altering hunting strategies, relying more on inland routes or different species. There is no clear sign of collapse in the archaeological record, no mass graves, no signs of conflict or fire. Instead, a quiet dispersal, an eastward migration toward deeper valleys and higher plateaus, perhaps seeking stability. The end of their era was not marked by invasion nor sudden disaster, but by slow absorption into new patterns, some merging with emerging Norse communities, others vanishing from the record as entirely separate lines faded. The name they once carried has been lost to time, only traces remain in place, names and tool forms that linger just beyond recognition. What remains uncertain is whether this transformation was driven more by environmental change or subtle social transformations. The slow pull of shifting alliances, evolving trade routes, or generational shifts in identity. We do not know if their culture ended because it could no longer sustain itself or simply because its way of life ceased to be the dominant one, but we do know that something shifted, and once changed, nothing returned to how it had been. Yet even as the outlines of this ancient society become clearer, many questions remain unresolved. Precise chronology of their arrival and departure remains uncertain. Some layers suggest occupation centuries before known Norse activity, but without consistent radiocarbon dating across all sites, timelines blur into uncertainty. It is tempting to imagine a grand, unified culture stretching across northern Scandinavia, though the evidence reveals scattered settlements, varying in size and complexity, suggesting regional variation rather than a single cohesive civilization. The notion of a centralized society with shared laws or governance is not supported by current findings. No monumental architecture, writing systems, or administrative remains have been uncovered. There persists a common myth that this culture was somehow isolated, untouched by outside influence, but the presence of non-local materials, certain stone types, trade beads, and metallurgical traces suggests contact with distant communities, possibly even across the Barents Sea. Whether these connections were through seasonal exchange or long-distance voyaging remains speculative. Another oversimplification lies in portraying them as purely passive inhabitants of a harsh landscape. Their survival was not merely endurance. It required deliberate adaptation, innovation in sea travel, and sophisticated knowledge of ice conditions and ocean currents. Yet the full extent of their navigational skill is unknown. We lack instruments or maps to confirm how they charted routes across open water. Equally uncertain is their fate. The abrupt disappearance of settlements around 500 BCE does not align neatly with known Viking expansions which began centuries later. Some suggest climate shifts, perhaps a cooling phase, but this remains unproven at the scale required to explain such widespread abandonment. Others propose internal collapse or migration, but without written records, these remain hypotheses. Most importantly, we cannot assume that every site represents a distinct people. Some may have been seasonal camps rather than permanent homes, and while their maritime technology appears advanced for its time, it is difficult to assess whether they were the first seafarers in this region or simply one among several early cultures navigating northern waters. The truth lies not in certainty, but in the careful recognition of what we do not know, and why that silence matters. What endures is not just the stone foundations beneath the snow, nor the driftwood and bone tools tucked into permafrost like secrets kept through centuries. It is the quiet persistence of a way of life that did not need to conquer to endure. These people lived on the edge, not because they had no choice, but because they chose it. Their villages were scattered across fjords where ice still crept in from the north each winter, yet their homes stood firm, built with an understanding of wind patterns and thermal shifts long before such knowledge was recorded in writing. They navigated by stars, currents, and memory, by the silent language of sea ice and whale song. They hunted seals not just for survival, but with a rhythm that respected the balance between taking and leaving enough. Their tools were shaped with precision, their boats crafted to ride waves that would have overwhelmed lesser hands. And yet they left no grand monuments, no inscriptions, no claims etched into stone. What endures is how little we thought of them, how easily we dismissed northern coasts as barren margins until the ice cracked open and revealed layers beneath our assumptions. Their silence speaks louder than any epic. It reminds us that civilizations are not measured by conquest or monuments, but by resilience in place, by adaptation without fanfare. This matters because it changes how we see human history, not as a march forward with inevitable progress, but as a network of quiet choices made over generations to stay, to listen, to live within limits. The past is not always about rising empires and great names. Sometimes it's about people who knew the land so well they didn't need to name it. And in that knowing quiet, patient, enduring, the truest kind of strength lives on. Not in stone, but in memory.